What protocol is to be utilized to gain the maximum benefit from supramaximal eccentrics in terms of like reps and sets and movement speed? What might you recommend in terms of a protocol for people that either use your technology or maybe they have access to something else that delivers a similar type of effect?
Well, I think that's a very important question and one that needs to be addressed. There's a lot of literature recently about volume intensity and number of sets and a number of repetitions. If you review that literature, you almost get the impression that everything works.
I thought that the evidence suggested that soreness wasn't an indicator of a lack of recovery. So you're saying that's not, you don't think that's the case. You think soreness is a clear indicator that one is not fully recovered from their training.
If you're applying a structural overload to the muscle and you're creating these micro injuries or micro tears in the muscle for additional muscle tissue to be formed, you need that process to be complete before you train again.
Welcome to another episode brought to you by Imagine Strength, the future of safe, simple, and effective high-intensity training equipment. Are you a HIIT studio owner looking for equipment that's not just top-notch, but also tailored to your specific needs? Imagine Strength is your answer. Inspired by the legendary Arthur Jones, Imagine Strength is revolutionizing the HIIT industry with their state-of-the-art yet affordable equipment. Their team doesn't just sell HIIT equipment, they live and breathe it. I've personally experienced their gear at the Resistance Exercise Conference, and let me tell you, it was an intense workout that I won't soon forget, in the best way possible, of course. So why choose Imagine Strength? Number one, they provide customized solutions for HIIT studios. Number two, they have budget-friendly yet high-performance designs. And number three, they're committed to innovation and excellence in high-intensity training specifically. Founder Jeff Turner and his dedicated team are on a mission to make HIIT accessible to everyone. Getting started is easy. Number one, visit imaginestrength.com. Number two, consult with their expert team. And number three, choose the equipment that will skyrocket your business. Don't wait. Head over to imaginestrength.com and elevate your HIIT studio today with Imagine Strength. Lauren Snell here, and welcome back to High Intensity Business, your one-stop shop for elevating your HIIT business and fueling your passion for high-intensity training. This is episode 453, and I'm joined again by Dr. Michael MacMillan. Dr. Michael MacMillan is a retired orthopedic surgeon and former associate professor from the University of Florida. He now resides in St. Petersburg, Florida, where it's a lot warmer there than it is here right now. He's born in New York City and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina. He has a notable background in athletics, having set a North Carolina state record in powerlifting. Dr. MacMillan is also an alumnus of North Carolina State University and the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, has a deep interest in musculoskeletal biomechanics. He's renowned for his work in spinal surgery and research, particularly focusing on the medical applications of resistance exercise, with a special emphasis on eccentric muscle force during his tenure with MedX at the Center for Exercise Science. Mike, great to see you again. Thank you for doing this.
Lawrence, listen, thanks for your continuing interest. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. As we were saying, my audience have had a fantastic reaction to you and are clearly very interested in this topic. So excited to have you back. Before we get into this, I will just say this is part two of our conversation about eccentrics, and your thoughts around, the importance of eccentrics in a workout and more precisely your technology, which really helps eccentrics become more effective. But it's really important, I guess, to say for the listeners and viewers to check out part one first, because part one, I believe, is much more of a foundation to this podcast. We're probably going to talk less about the definitions of eccentrics and the mechanisms and that type of thing. So if people want to get a kind of the foundational basis for this, I point them to part one, and I'll link that up in the show notes to this over at episode 453 on highintensitybusiness.com. But if you want to find that episode yourself, the episode number is 444, which is part one. You can find that on highintensitybusiness.com, or you can just go straight to YouTube. YouTube's a very popular place these days, and just search High Intensity Business and search 444 or Dr. Mike MacMillan, and it will pop straight up. So I encourage you to listen to that first and then come back and consume part two. because we're going to be getting into more different types of questions that are still related to the same theme. Also, I really enjoyed, Mike, watching your workout demo and demoing your technology on your website, maxneg.com. So if you're listening to this and you're more of a visual learner and you want to get a better understanding of how this really works in practice, the technology and the principles, then head on over to maxneg.com and you can obviously contact Mike through there and learn all about your service, your products. But also there's a really good video demonstration where you show a bench press with the technology, which I really enjoyed. You look great, by the way.
No,
You looked after yourself.
I'm hanging in there.
So I guess we'll get straight into questions, right? So I'm going to kick off with questions that we received on social media and on the blog. So here we go. So the first question is, in part 1, you mentioned that we use eccentric strength to prevent collapse when walking down the stairs, right? And this listener has a rare disorder called myotonic dystrophy that causes the muscle to turn off at any given moment. He wonders if there is a connection between this training response and adaptation to helping those afflicted with this disease. So in terms of your specific protocol, whether there's a benefit to it there.
Yeah. Well, I can't hold myself as an expert. I remember studying myotonic dystrophy, but I just don't know if the basis of that is a neurologic dysfunction or an inherent problem with the muscular proteins. So I would hate to put this out as a potential treatment for that disorder without looking at it further.
Yeah. Thank you.
That was an unhelpful ansser.
No, not at all. I much prefer you were completely honest about that. I really respect that. So no, I think that's a way better response than trying to come up with something more interesting that's potentially not true, obviously. All right, so we'll quickly move on. So the next question is, what protocol is to be utilized to gain the maximum benefit from supramaximal eccentrics in terms of like reps and sets and movement speed? I was watching you on your video demonstrate this, and you were just, I don't know whether you were doing just an arbitrary number of reps to demonstrate the technology, but what might you recommend in terms of a protocol for people that either use your technology or maybe they have access to something else that delivers a similar type of effect? How do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a very important question and one that needs to be addressed. So I think first and foremost, there's a lot of literature recently about volume intensity and number of sets and a number of repetitions. And, if you review that literature, you almost get the impression that everything works.
Right.
And, so I would put forth that for the initial phases of training, if you're making progress with standard weightlifting techniques, whether you're using high repetition or low repetition, that you continue that training, do your progressive resistance exercise with that. Because I think the true value of eccentrics come when you hit plateau, and which is ascribed to many different impediments to making further progress. But I think that's a pretty difficult phase for most weightlifters to get through. And I think that's when a supramaximal stimulus has the most value, is when you can do a enhanced overload to get more of a physiologic stimulus and go further from that. So that's probably part 1 of the answer.
Interesting. So just to peel that back a little bit more. So would you say that conventional methods, they inherently have sticking points, right? A lot of these exercises. And maybe, like you say, the you said it there, enhanced stimulus, like it's not, the stimulus isn't optimized enough to really fatigue the, I guess, structural components to stimulate that improvement. Like there becomes a barrier to that with traditional methods. Is that fair?
I'm a big fan of progressive resistance exercise, but in its essence, it's a negative feedback loop. You do 10 repetitions, which say that's your goal. So you add weight, then it becomes a little harder to do 10 repetitions. So when you reach it, you add more weight, and then suddenly you can't do 10 repetitions anymore. You've reached this point where you can't add weight anymore because you can't do it more. So you need to do something to the muscle to make it capable of adding more weight again. And in my world, that is, strictly adding more myofilaments or myofibers or more myofilaments to the muscle in order to increase its force production.
And is your approach to eccentric training just going to do that more effectively? Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah, that's pretty much what we talk about with
Yeah.
overload stimulates structural changes. And now, having said that, I'll just go ahead and say this, that it's probably better to start with submaximal eccentrics. This is just, let's put safety first out there. So if you've reached a plateau and you're not making any progress, start with your eccentric weight as being about 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max, and 67% of use the concentric. And then employ progressive resistance exercise using the negative weight. If you successfully do, let's say, whatever the numbers are, 180 pounds eccentric and 140 pounds up, keep that 40-pound difference and just increase to 190 and 150, and then 200, which would be your max, and use the eccentric weight as your way to enter into the eccentric overload zone.
Okay. Yeah. I think we're certainly going to come with some questions about recovery in a minute on this. But just something that come up for me is, I know on your website, you do have a section for, pertinent kind of research papers that I believe are related to your work. But I think one of the things we spoke about last time is the potential importance of having a situation where you can actually do some kind of study with your specific technology, and where you have a control group, I guess, one group. I don't know whether this is even possible to do, whether it would even be the changes would happen, or it would need a longer time to make the changes happen that you would like to see. So it might be like super expensive and difficult to do. Well, you have one control group do like traditional resistance training, and another control group do, use your technology to enhance the eccentric, and see what the difference are in terms of, I guess, deformation to the bone and the structural adaptations that on ligaments and tendons and bone that happen as a result of that. Is that something somewhere you would like to get to? Is that possible?
Absolutely. And of course you'll need the equipment to do that. I'll tell you, it's a difficult proposition though, because typically in training groups, you try to equate volume, whether you're doing low reps, high load, or high reps, low load. All the studies tend to try to equate volume. It is, and even with my experience, I'm a little perplexed on how to equate eccentric volume to concentric volume.
You have to do volume matched, wouldn't you? Right.
Yeah. And frankly, you can't increase the eccentric volume in proportion to the concentric, because it's a higher intensity experience, and it doesn't equate to the same physiologic situation.
But can you equate time under load on the eccentric? Can you just use that variable?
You can, but the time under a concentric load is relatively tolerable, and the time under an eccentric load is much more difficult. So if I had to do one of those studies now, I would just do a standard training program of someone's preference, and then do the same program, but add in eccentric overloads.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but then how would that? Sorry, say that again, just so I understand that. Just repeat.
So if someone says I'm doing, 10 reps, with 200 pounds, then, that's their concentric weight. I would use the same concentric weight and then add in a eccentric overload to that.
Mm-hmm.
And now
got it.
That'll affect your rep range. So there's a lot of variables with that that have to be addressed. And I don't think there's a an answer that's going to be satisfactory to everybody on how to compare
I
the
see.
two.
You need to get the Jameses on the case,
Yeah,
like, James Steele and James Fisher. I always
yes,
find,
yes.
hopefully they'll listen to this, or at least one of the, I think James Fisher may. James Steele is busy doing other things. I don't know if he's as interested in this stuff as much right now. I could be completely wrong about that. But yeah, I just find their approach to the science very rigorous in this. I think they would be very interested to, I don't know, to think about this and perhaps design some studies around it, maybe.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I'd be more than happy to see what their take on that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So yeah, you answered the question there, all roads lead to Rome, or it all works in terms of protocol. So just take whatever protocol you're doing probably and just apply this and use progressive resistance. And
Yes.
I guess modify volume and frequency as appropriate in relation to performance, as one does with, progressive resistance type training and, passing out recovery between workouts.
Absolutely. Now you're getting into the recovery question. That's a huge issue in
Yeah.
eccentrics as well.
Yeah. Before we get there, which is definitely
Yeah.
coming up very soon, just another question on how the protocol can be done. Can this be done on a Smith machine? Could you connect your device or use a similar approach of a Smith machine?
Yes. Yes. Actually,
Okay.
that would be relatively easy to do. And I don't think we've discussed this because I've discussed about Imagine and MedX.
Yeah.
We right now our primary beta site testing is with free weights. So we are able to do free weights, which was a much higher difficulty to accomplish than a selectorized machine. So
Right.
Smith would be easy to do as well.
Yeah, and just so people get a better idea of what you're talking about, Mike, they can obviously go to the website maxneg.com and watch that demo where you use a barbell, right, free weight
Right.
barbell bench press to demonstrate the technology, and then the viewers and listeners can really get a better idea of how simple, I guess. That obviously the technology is, I'm sure, very complicated, but when you see, you're like, oh right, yeah, I can see how that could be very effectively applied to lots of different types of workout equipment.
Yeah, I should give a tip of the hat to one of the Myonics partners, Lee Smith, who has a very strong background in motion control technology. And that was an extremely hard nut to crack, is to follow the user in a range of motion and make those transitions between positive and negative as smooth as possible. And he did a fantastic job with that.
Wow. Okay. Great stuff. Thank you. All right. So, so going into some questions in relation to overtraining. So you mentioned it there. So the question is, what about the idea that doing negatives too often can quickly lead to overtraining? How do we prevent that from happening?
Don't do it too often. So absolutely. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about, the physiology of it. Obviously, when you do resistance training, again, we talked about mechanotransduction, that you stimulate these receptors in the cellular architecture of the muscle. The big thing now is plastomeres. That's where all the transductors are worked at,
Mhm.
and you favor the protein synthesis of the muscle. So you decrease the muscle breakdown at the same time you increase the muscle synthesis, and you create basically more myofibrils to contribute to that. So the difference with eccentrics is at some point, and I mentioned this in the first podcast too, that just making protein is great if the muscle architecture has a place to put it and incorporate it into the muscle mechanism. but at some point you need to create more spaces. So that's when you transition from just what I would call homeostasis, which is the balance of uh, breakdown and manufacture, and you go to the physiology of repair and regeneration. And so that requires a disruption of the muscular components, and this disruption allows incorporation of further myofibrils into it. But that disruption is an injury. I mean, it is, when you talk about soreness and the physiologic reaction, that's the difference between normal homeostasis physiology and repair and regeneration. Just one last addition to that is the regeneration part comes from the famous satellite cells that are on the periphery of the muscle as well, and that's a very strong stimulus for them to incorporate into the muscle and form more. So you have essentially done micro injuries to the muscle with eccentric overloads. And so it requires a longer time for recuperation and healing.
Okay, so if you're using your enhanced eccentric stimulus, one might have to reduce their frequency because suddenly they are producing a greater stimulus and more damage during their workout. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
So you could go from working out once, twice a week to like once a week in order to maintain progress. And
I believe once a week is the absolute
right.
maximum time to work out with eccentric overloads. Obviously, there's other um, um, ancillary exercises you can do in the interim, but if you're doing a primary muscle group and not this is why I encourage people to start with submaximal eccentrics and gradually build up. You can titrate your soreness. So if you start with submaximal eccentrics, you're not going to be very sore. And then as you gradually increase it, you'll notice you'll have more soreness after your workout, and you just stop the increase in order to minimize the soreness. And the absence of soreness is a very strong signal that you're able to train again.
All right. Okay. I didn't see that's interesting because I've heard different when it comes to soreness. I thought that the evidence suggested that soreness wasn't an indicator of a lack of recovery. So you're saying that's not, you don't think that's the case. You think soreness is a clear indicator that one is not fully recovered from their training.
Um, from my standpoint, if you're applying a structural overload to the muscle and you're creating these micro injuries or micro tears in the muscle for additional muscle tissue to be formed, you need that process to be complete before you train again.
Sure, of course.
And it's in the range of a 7-day process
Okay.
minimum.
And you think soreness is a proxy for that? It's a result of that happening or that repair going on.
Yeah, I think early experience with eccentrics, especially if you start with your 1 rep max or your 120% of your max, you start in that range, you are definitely going to go through that process I just described. You're going to have soreness afterwards, and it's going to take some time to recover and to rebuild and then have another session. So that's why earlier I said, why don't we sneak into this? Why don't we start in the submaximal for the eccentrics? And then as you increase, again, progressive resistance exercise on the eccentric side, you can monitor that and make your weight choices according to how you feel.
Yeah, so I don't mean to keep tangenting about soreness. I'm just interested in your perspective on this.
It's a huge topic in eccentrics.
Yeah, because I haven't I guess explored it recently, but I'm just trying to remember. My understanding was that when it comes to soreness, and I've definitely explored this on the podcast in the past, is we don't, whilst it happens and we know we get it as a result of doing exercise, we don't know exactly what causes it. We still don't know, is my understanding. Obviously, there's hypotheses, but we haven't, like, the literature's quite sort of inconclusive on the subject, was my understanding. And so I know, for instance, people in here that will train when they're sore because they believe that soreness does not mean that they have not recovered. Now, obviously, intuitively, that feels very counterintuitive,
Right.
because for me, when I'm really sore, I am not going anywhere near the
Right.
gym, even though when you work out, you actually feel less sore, don't you, when you start doing it, I find. Um, but it just, I don't know. Well, usually, to your point though, soreness is associated with it's still only been 24, 40 hours after a workout. So I'm not going to work out anyway, because I know that my body's going to probably need more time to fully recover. So it just happens to be that I'm sore during then. I just find the topic interesting to a degree. So no, I don't know if you've got any further thoughts about that.
Yeah, let me
Yeah.
go into that a little bit.
Yeah.
So, this is really the concept of that phase when you go into repair and regeneration. So we spend a lot of time in surgery talking about wound healing factors, and so when you have a mechanical insult to any tissue, there is a stepwise progression of healing that occurs that you can't change. And the first thing is, there's inflammation. You get inflammatory cells. There's a migration, and then the constituent cells, whatever they are, fibroblasts or muscle cells in this case, stimulate protein synthesis, and it heals. So that's really kind of like, my perspective on soreness is that the repair and generation is really part of that standard healing process. So I don't think uh, they talk much about healing in the exercise science world, more about the physiology of protein synthesis in terms of its homeostatic function.
Got it. Okay. Just going back a second to what you were saying about when we talk about like bumping up against your limits, in terms of making progress, and how this enhanced eccentric stimulus might help one overcome a plateau in their performance and in their strength and other factors. You also talked about, we hinted at in the last podcast, about the potential benefits for hypertrophy, all right, maximizing muscle mass. Now, obviously, we're all somewhat constrained by genetic limits. How much do you think, and this is a big question, it'd be difficult for you to answer probably, but I know there's a lot of listeners out there who are very interested in your approach and are like want to test it out. But what kind of benefit do you sort of hypothesize, from just in terms of like hypertrophy and muscle gain? Do you think this protocol might have for someone? Do you think it's going to help eke? I know, again, genetics of everything, but do you think it'll really eke out more muscle growth for people?
Well, I'll say something glib to begin with, and then
Okay.
go from there. A mouse cannot work out to become a rat. So you can become a muscular mouse, but you'll never become a rat. So in other words, the genetic limitation is always the ultimate boundary. Now, having said that, there's obviously, with today's bodybuilders, there's a tremendous opportunity for muscular growth. And I do believe that eccentrics are the most legal and logical way to stimulate hypertrophy. In other words, to me, hypertrophy is each myofiber, the muscle cell, getting the maximum number of myofilaments in it that it can tolerate, and packing that into the muscle and increasing the outer diameter of the muscle itself, which is hypertrophy. The I don't know of a better way to achieve that except through eccentric overloads. Concentric weights are not a strong stimulus for structural adaptation.
Really?
I think that in a purely concentric world, that you will reach your genetic limit very predictably, and whatever you're programmed for. But at some point, there has to be a process to accommodate further muscle tissue to be incorporated. And that requires this breakdown, which typically occurs during eccentric overloads.
Very interesting. So this is what you were referring to last podcast. You said about how negatives are going to perhaps help more with structural adaptations, and concentric positive is going to help more with physiological adaptations
Right.
within the structure. Yeah. Interesting.
Now I'm going to just add something on here. Obviously, there are people using concentric weights, and getting very good results. That's undeniable. I would challenge anyone in your audience to just grab let's say you weigh 200 pounds, and I actually did this, and grab a 100-pound barbell and stand on a bathroom scale. So the bathroom scale should read 300. So, and so as you initiate your curl and do a curl with that barbell on the bathroom scale, as you initiate that curl, that weight is now, you look down at the number, it's going to go up. It's going to, because you're fighting against the inertia of the barbell, you're pushing against it, you're adding resistance. And so that 300 pounds is going to go up to 320, 330. It's going to go up, and then it'll kind of come back down, may actually go below 300 when you reach the top. And then when you lower the barbell down and take it to the bottom, as you stop the weight from descending, that bathroom scale could go up to 400. I mean, there are large impulses of forces in any weight, obviously worse in free weights than in selectorized equipment. So even though I'm talking about eccentrics here and how they can only do this, people get doses of eccentrics in normal weightlifting too. That enables this hypertrophy process that we're talking about. And
you're optimizing that. Yeah.
A lot of the techniques that people talk about, especially cheating and partials and things like that, all involve eccentric overloads to the muscles.
Let me do a little bit more devil's advocate, which I know I did plenty of last time as well. I think you made the case where you sort of explained that you felt that enhanced eccentric stimulus, like you advocate, is significantly more productive overall versus traditional eccentrics. And I'm always wondering, are we slicing the ham very thin at this point? Which I don't think you believe that, because you wouldn't be doing this if that was the case. Sometimes maybe I default to that because I'm very, like you alluded to during this podcast, you look at all the research and you look at the preponderance of research on training and you realize volume, frequency, it doesn't really matter all that much.
Yeah.
I just can't believe it, really. It baffles the mind when you get people still advocating that high volumes are so much more productive, because the research just seems so clear that they're not, in terms of the differences in response. It's so small that you can barely see it with the human eye type of adaptation. So
yeah, I saw the research on that. Yes.
Right. You're talking about Brad Schoenfeld's volume study. The fact,
0.08.
Right. So I know in myself that I do tend to lean towards this idea that, and probably a lot of my listeners and people in our industry don't like this at all, where I sort of lean towards this more, nothing really matters, Mike. It's just, make sure you're lifting weights a couple of times a week and you're all good. Use a high degree of effort. But I don't mean to say that I don't also like to try and optimize certain things. I certainly do. So not to digress, but that's kind of the way I lean sometimes. So when I get presented with something like this, my kind of default reaction sometimes is like, is the juice worth the squeeze? That's the saying, right? So can you just tell me more about that, like in terms of the differences that you hypothesize or know in terms of how this enhanced eccentric stimulus is going to benefit, and by what degree as well?
Well, obviously that's the $64 million question.
Right.
So there's sort of two ways to approach that. First, you have to acknowledge that eccentrics exist. We have we basically, we, the research today and the two-dimensional research, they basically have weights and number of reps and, all the various combinations of permutations of a weight and a rep, and it's all concentrically based. Very little discussion about eccentrics. So first of all, you have to acknowledge, oh yeah, well, there is a thing called eccentrics. And then you kind of have to acknowledge that eccentrics have an important function. And you, once my eyes open to eccentrics, you see them everywhere. And, like I said, stepping off steps, jumping, in athletics, when a high jumper runs and plants their foot, it's 7 times body weight.
Wow.
So you have an important function. It really exists, but we're not really addressing it. So the juice worth the squeeze is an unanswered question right now. The question is, well, what happens if we address eccentrics? And I think that we should address eccentrics too. I think it's an important function in the muscle. It's not routinely discussed. And then from the orthopedic influence, I would call structural biology. From the structural biology sense, it is a key fact. Structural biology is when you, we talked about this a little bit, when you take a tendon, a ligament, a muscle, or a bone, and you apply a force which actually deforms it, that muscle is constrained to react to that force by increasing its size. So number one, eccentrics exist. They're in the muscle. And I know that there is a inviolate law that when subjected to an overload, it will react and grow. Now, I personally believe that it's going to be a significant amount, probably not as big as I would hope, but in that plateau situation, when you're doing concentrics and you've leveled out, what are your options at that point? There's so many strategies at that point. And to me, the obvious option to get you through that everyone suffers from is to add in eccentrics, get the structural changes to change the muscle to accommodate to the higher load.
Let me just, I was going to pause you there, but you sound like you finished your point. Fascinating. So just in the instance where one doesn't have access to your technology or similar technology, what can they do to improve their existing workouts? For example, could one do negative only? Could one go to concentric failure, but follow up with negative only, or just follow up more additional volume with maybe accentuated negatives? Do you have any thoughts there, or is that still going to be not enough?
Well, that's what led to the equipment. I mean, there really isn't a great satisfactory answer for that. I will refer, I will say this, it's a little bit of a tangential, but but it's pertinent. This is great for the HIT audience. In the 3 major proponents of high intensity training, Arthur Jones, Mike Mentzer, and Dorian Yates. And if you look specifically at their experiences and for example, Arthur Jones during the Colorado experiment, often maligned, probably deserves a little malalignment, but he clearly at the end of the concentric rep in the Nautilus, he did post-failure repetitions, and one of the post-failure strategies he used was eccentric onlys. Mike Mentzer as well. Yeah, he'd stand there, they'd work you out, can't do one more rep either. Forced reps are essentially a form of eccentrics, and he would actually do eccentric overloads too. And finally, Dorian Yates is a proponent of negatives as well and uses them in his high intensity. So they have been employed in the past, and have been successfully used. And, but right now they are not quantifiable. They're not programmable. They're, and potentially dangerous if you don't know how much load you're applying. Yeah. So I would say that right now, the best thing you have is some sort of post-failure eccentric work. And, but what I'd like to do is bring this into a zone where you can actually put numbers down, track it, and figure out what your progress is.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Got me thinking about when Dr. Doug McGuff in Body by Science talks about how he would plan a workout over the course of a year. So he would do like, this protocol in January and the next protocol in February. And I'm thinking for those who are listening to this who maybe can't get access to your technology, maybe what they could do in the interim is maybe have that kind of approach to training to kind of mitigate overtraining. Because we know that you have to be careful with the negatives in terms of the overtraining, right? And so maybe that means that for a month you train negative only or with a negative emphasis. And then the next month you use less negatives, maybe concentric only, or maybe just a standard one, a faster negative movement speed, for example. I'm just thinking about listeners who might be thinking about how can I, use this insight to program my training over the long term. I don't know if you know this, Mike, but we did a podcast with STG, Strength and Power, which is a company owned by Mike Petrella and his colleague Spike, whose actual real name is, I'm forgetting. But they tried to replicate the experiment as closely as possible, given that he's got this amazing, array of machines in his space. And they got some pretty good results from it, if I remember, in terms of like muscle gain. But I just mentioned that because if people are interested in learning more about the Colorado experiment, I think you could probably search it on my site and find a few posts that refer to it. But if you want to see a modern reenactment, I guess, or a good attempt at it, go and check out. I'll link to the STG Strength and Power podcast on their Colorado experiment for you. So question, I thought we never actually talked about your training, Mike, and I'm fascinated. So I'm assuming you are utilizing this yourself in your own training, right? They
have something around the country called Senior Olympics. And part of the Senior Olympics are the senior powerlifting. So I'm in the 70 to 75 age group.
Wow, fair play.
Surprisingly competitive. But so we have, the present unit that we have is in a free weight, actually a hardcore powerlifting gym. I was surprised to see that there are numbers of gyms dedicated just to powerlifting. And they obviously they were very interested in this. So yes, I did use it for the meet. And I basically experimented on myself. Okay. And I overtrained with it. It's hard not to, but we, doing negative bench presses, negative squats are a real treat, by the way. And also some, it's a little less applicable for deadlift. Deadlift is one of the almost pure concentric activities, but I did some deadlift overloads as well.
So how are you faring in competition? How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. The squat is a little off because I have a little hip dysplasia, and it's really difficult for me to get down to that below -1. But I'm not doing it so much to become a world champion powerlifter, but I have found, your listeners will be glad to know that if you maintain your muscle mass when you get old, it's a really good thing. Just keep doing it, because I'm here to tell you that, and I use the powerlifting to make that happen.
Let's go. Today's episode is sponsored by Imagine Strength, the game changer in safe, simple, and effective high-intensity training machines. When it comes to HIIT, Imagine Strength is your go-to for intelligently designed, efficient, and affordable equipment. Their team is passionate about HIIT, and it shows in every piece they craft. So why are Imagine Strength the right choice? Number one, they tailor-make their equipment for HIIT studios. Number two, they provide cost-effective solutions for your business. And number three, they are committed to ongoing innovation and refinement. Ready to take your HIIT business to the next level? Visit imaginestrength.com to discuss your needs and find the perfect gear for your studio. Join the HIIT revolution of Imagine Strength and transform your workout experience today. Let's go. You look well and look great for your age. And I was thinking, how do you feel? I mean, a lot of your friends who are similar age to yourself, or just people you meet that are similar age to you, do you stand out like a sore thumb?
Well, I live in a condo in St. Pete, and it's an age group, 65 to 80
Sure.
in that age group, and I'm just working out light now in the condo fitness room. I don't want to say anything, but uh, uh, I there's a difference between what I'm doing in that condo fitness room and what the other
Of
guys are
course.
doing.
Yeah.
It's pull-ups, there's just just things that I normally do in a powerlifting gym kind of really stand out
Yeah.
amongst people of my own age.
How many chin-ups can you do? Sorry, I'm really interested now.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you hold a gun to my head, I could do 12.
Really?
Yeah, I'm
Wow.
keeping
That's
up with
really
that.
good.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Wow.
if I really extend my chin up.
Wow, that is very impressive. That's very inspiring, actually. Yeah, wow. So, okay, and let's move on to some more questions, shall we? So we talked about overtraining. Let's see here. And okay, so we've answered quite a few questions there because they're kind of related. S- okay, maybe I'm not sure I fully answered this question, Mike. You tell me if you understand it. I still don't understand how to actually implement this safely. No word on the importance of a good handoff, which I assume is related to a spotter. I could be wrong.
Yes, yeah.
Any thoughts on that question?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, our equipment provides a set amount of weight. So again, if I'm doing 200-pound negative and I want 40 pounds of help, I'll push 160 up. Um, on the bar will be 200, it'll be 40 pounds, and then the 40 pounds will release, and I'll lower 200. We absolutely recommend safety stops on free weights. Should be used at all times, and a spotter, because failure can occur even in the use of our equipment as well.
Yeah, if you're
Um,
doing a squat, I suppose, even though you're able to handle a lot more load safely, at the end of the day, you're still going to get to a point of failure where there's a lot of risk, right?
right, and the bar still weighs the negative weight, which
Yeah.
by definition you can't lift. So yes, all the routine safety precautions that you use in a weight room should be used as well. Obviously, and let me just say this, we're talking a lot about strength training, which obviously is, um,
Sure.
the uh, believe it or not, my major thrust for this project is medical applications, and we have equipment even now that we're using for 80 and 90-year-olds and using eccentrics and following all the precautions. And
This is still strength training
it is
for
medics
that
based.
demographic, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Okay, using this technology. Can you elaborate?
Okay. Hold on for a second. So, when we first, my intent all from the days of working, Arthur went from Nautilus to Medics. He went from the fitness industry to the medical industry. There's a whole history of spine equipment with that, and so this equipment was born out of that. And so we recognized, and my spine background uh, made me recognize that the number one problem that identifies older people and affects their mobility more than anything is basically standing upright. Your body has many obstacles to stand. Most of your mass is in front of your body. Your shoulders end up in front of your body. Your head. You're constantly pulled forward and bend forward. I'm going to say something that is sort of ageism, but most of the time when I see somebody on a walker, it's neglect. And not neglect on their part. It's part of the neglect of the medical institution to give them the proper tools where they don't need to walk with a walker. So we took you might like this. We took a MedX low back machine. We built 4 or 5 of these stations. And um, if if you're familiar with that, there's a sliding foot plate that goes in front of the chair, and then you have the bar behind it. So we took that so you could sit and put the seat, a leg press seat, on the sliding foot chair, and also use the bar that you use for the back extension as a leg press. And so it can do lumbar extension, it can do leg press. And then I'll give a shout out to Ken Kepler, who worked with MedX back in the day. And I
Yeah, I know
forget
that
Rick.
name.
Oh,
Yeah.
you know Ken? Yeah,
Oh
Ken's.
no, I don't know
Yeah,
him, but I recognize the name. Sorry.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was a MedX. He made MedX machines in Gainesville, Florida, when I was there.
Okay.
So when it kind of shut down down in Ocala, and Ricky, I forget his last name, a very capable machinist, worked with Ken, and they helped design this machine. The third movement that this machine could do, they put in a pivot bar. So what I call parallel grip deadlift, or a trap bar deadlift, that would be we lift the weight stack up with it too. So we took the three major muscles that you need when you're old: knee extension, hip extension, and lumbar extension. If there's only three things you do with the elderly, if you do knee extension, hip extension, and lumbar extension, you can stand upright.
Right.
So we did that. Plus we added the negative function. So now it sounds, I'm sure there's people's heads exploding and smoke coming out of their ears right now saying,
Why?
yeah, you're doing negatives on 90-year-olds and
My
actually
audience wouldn't be, they'd be celebrating that, I think.
oh, okay. I just,
Yeah.
obviously eccentrics are kind of seen as an extreme activity,
I
but
see.
again, when applied at a low dose and increased gradually with careful discussion with the patient or client, the we were able to get as you're familiar with reverse bone density measurements from osteoporosis to osteopenia and things like that.
Sure.
So I really the key thing is really was one set once a week with the eccentric piece. So I think that we have a more refined dosing mechanism when we add in the eccentrics.
And what is the results with that population that you've seen or seeing?
Well, we haven't um, done any scientific studies on this.
Yeah, just
So,
anecdotal, like.
yeah, anecdotally, my other partner, Mike Draper, is running a clinic up there in Jacksonville. He did, in fact, reverse his mother's, got her off anti-resorptive medications for osteoporosis, and had older people increase their functional activity through strength training. And obviously you can do that with all the strength training
Sure.
activities, but the obstacles for the elderly to continuing, and this is the problem. The problem is, how do we make it accessible to the elderly population? Number one, you don't really need to do curls when you're 90 years old. Yeah, it's not.
I don't know, mate. I can't. You'll see me still doing curls at that point.
We need to do them. But when someone's coming off the street, they just want to know, what do I have to do to do better? And when you can narrow down the number of exercises and the amount of time you spend in that machine, it really increases the adherence to the program when you can do that. And I think that's the critical thing we're bringing to the medical application is making it more adherence friendly.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Really interesting. And I think, just to add to your answer there regarding safety, I think for the person Richard is the chap who actually submitted that question. I think you want to take a look at the videos. You want to go again. I'm going to say it again. I keep plugging your website because I thought the video was really useful. maxneg.com. You can check out the workout demo that Mike does. And he shows you how there's a really I was just very impressed, I guess, by the elegance of the technology. You have the app on the phone. You simply type in the load, and then you hit go, and it's sort of activated. And then you have these like this pulley mechanism that connects to the barbell, and obviously this I'm assuming changes depending on what we're talking about, whether it's a free weight or a selectorized machine. But I think by watching that, you'll get a really good understanding of how safe this is. I think. Turns out what we're using it.
It's
Yeah. Mm.
it's not somebody throwing rocks on top of you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So let me see here. How do we integrate eccentric? Okay, so this is actually a question you had, or a talking point you had, Mike. I'm just going to read it to myself quickly. Make sure we're not duplicating stuff here. Um, so using some sort of understanding. Okay. So then if you want to talk more on this, maybe this has been covered. In fact, let me move on because I have other stuff I want to come on to. So you even work with athletes as well, is that correct?
Yes.
For this? Yeah.
And in a number of mainly, when I was with the university, we had that mechanical version I alluded to. There was a
Yeah.
counterweight stack, so we had the opportunity to do mainly hamstring rehabilitation with eccentrics, which now everybody's doing the Nordic thing, which is still a little uncontrolled, but obviously has proven to be a very useful application of eccentrics. And then in Orlando, we were fortunate to have Doc Rivers walk in our door in our eccentric gym back in 2002, and a few athletes coming in and using that as well. And it's actually his sons, when they were kids, worked out there. They went on to become NBA players. So
Oh wow.
we have
like Austin
everybody
Rivers.
likes
Yeah. Can you mention names or can you not mention names?
Well, I did mention a name, but this is not like these were people that came in through
Yeah.
word of mouth, and their personal trainers came in first and accompanied them. It wasn't a huge project or a major focus.
Can you speak more on that in terms of like the benefits you've seen athletes realize through doing supramaximal sort of eccentric work? Can you speak more on that in terms of what you've seen? And anecdotally, maybe I know a lot of this is difficult to, do large scale studies around.
The few anecdotes I have are with medical use. So for years in the University of Florida training room, one of our earlier units was used, especially for hamstring rehabilitation. And so Emmett Smith came in. He had exceptionally strong legs.
I don't know this person. Should I know who this is?
Emmett was a University of Florida football player.
Got it.
Who went to the Dallas Cowboys, promised his mother he'd go back and finish his degree, and he did. I mean, it was really a remarkable thing. But he came back to the University of Florida after he tore his hamstring and was unable to play. So we were able to work with him on that. And they did win the Super Bowl the next year. This is how long. So, but again, the anecdotes are a dime a dozen, and that's not really where the meat is. But I think as a broad statement I'll make, I believe that eccentric training will revolutionize sports. Now that's, I won't mention anecdotes, but I'll make these broad statements.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because I just, go through the list, where even the sprint start for sprinters, the first reaction when that gun goes off is for your muscles to lengthen against the inertia of the body. There is, and we probably should say this because you talked about negative only, there is a undeniable interplay, synergy between the eccentric and concentric strength. It's exemplified by the stretch shortening cycle. And that is a major power multiplier. And that's where the elastic muscle molecules we talked about, if they're stretched first, they add um, um, contracting power to the muscle themselves. So it's a force multiplier for the muscle. And that stretch shortening cycle occurs at the start of a sprint, at the start of a jump, even in throwing. 88% of the throwing cycle, before you throw the ball forward, you throw it backwards. And what you're doing is you're accumulating that stretch in there and bringing it forward. With the possible exception of swimming and cycling, I can't think of any sport that would not be helped by enhancing eccentric function in the athlete.
Fascinating. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All right, let's move on to some more of your thoughts here before we wrap here, Mike. You mentioned here what orthopedic conditions could be amenable to managing with eccentric training. For example, general conditions such as tendinopathies and prevention of musculotendinous injuries, if I'm pronouncing that right. Maybe elaborate on how you feel an enhanced eccentric approach is going to help with those conditions as well.
So that's probably the most well-established use of eccentrics. The literature is replete with use of eccentric. Now, unfortunately, when you dive in the articles, there's a lot of different ways of doing eccentric. So a lot of these proposed techniques are not truly eccentric overloads. But we talked about Wolff's law for bone, where when it's subjected to an overload, the bone thickens and becomes hypertrophic. There's a similar law for collagenous structures, and that would be Davis's law. And so when you look at a weak tendon, it has the fibers are kind of circuitous, snake form, and but as you strengthen them eccentrically, they become thicker and straight. So you change the internal structure of the tendons and ligaments through eccentric overload.
Okay. Which is then going to help. How does that then help rehabilitate some of these things?
Well, it would be mainly for prevention,
I see.
And,
right.
And then rehabilitation, same process for rehabilitation. Go through the standard process, do concentric. The biggest mistake, shout out to Aaron Rodgers, that you can do. So when you look at the force level of what the Achilles tendon does, I forget what it is. It's something ridiculous, like 10 times body weight. I mean, that's why calves are so hard to. So they take someone who tore their Achilles tendon, and then they have them do toe raises. And I honestly believe when they do like 10 toe raises, or maybe with some weight, like 100 pounds or so, they say, okay, you're ready to play again. And sure enough, they go re-tear it. They need to recognize the function of that Achilles tendon is to absorb multiple body weights of force. If you're just picking up 200 pounds and your tendon is going to see 1,000 pounds of force on the field, you're going to re-tear your tendon. And just another quick example are hamstring injuries. Hamstrings, like I said with Emmett Smith, you lowering 300 pounds, just, tremendous eccentric capabilities. But they had people do a few on the hamstring machine, send them back out, and they re-tear their hamstring. I forget what the question was, but but eccentrically preparing the patient for replaying is imperative.
I get it. It's more, we were talking about prevention of, injuries, and to be specific, tendinopathies, muscular tendinous, if I'm pronouncing that right, injuries, how to prevent and rehab those. And so I think you answered that quite well. Look, you were at Rec, I want to say 2020, Vegas. I wasn't there, sadly.
Yeah.
I think I'm right about that. Is it 2020? I think it was right before it all kicked off, wasn't it, with COVID and everything shut down, I believe. I could be wrong about that. Was it a different year? Was it 2020? Am I right? Or 21? Never mind.
The COVID thing threw by,
it doesn't matter. What matters is that you were in Vegas at Rec, and you were
2021.
You were there with your
whenever
technology.
it took place, I was. Yeah.
Well, what was? I'm just curious, because obviously a lot of our colleagues are there. It's a very kind of hip-based event, right? A lot of people in high intensity training for the most part. what was the reaction to technology? As always, I'm assuming with this kind of thing, there's always a lot of cynicism, but I'm just curious what kind of reaction you had, if you remember.
Um, the the people that had successful repetitions, I mean, it really is remarkable. We had the curl machine set up.
Yes, you had a bicep curl, right?
Yeah, and it really is a unique experience when you raise it up and suddenly the weight changes in your hand. I mean, that's a we actually call that uh the the Myotonic smile, because they get it up and then all of a sudden they get weights coming down like that. Um, we little inside baseball here, as we say in the States. The We were leaving that weekend for the rec conference, and we had a hiccup with the machine, so we had to move the to another module to take to this sounds like an Elon Musk uh, m- uh, rocket launch. We had to switch out to the other one, and so there were some instances in that conference where it didn't work, and I had no idea what was. It was just and I, I was a little chagrined.
Uh,
It turned out that um, we put it in the module with a different gearbox, a 5-to-1 and 4-to-1. This you don't need to know this, but so it would work for a while, but the gearing would eventually set the count off. So a few people, it didn't work, and they were
I
very
see.
nice. But for the people that had the experience, it worked great.
Yeah.
And obviously that problem no longer exists.
Yeah, yeah. I feel so sorry for you. Like that's so unfortunate, right? These things
It's
happen.
that always happens. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah. Murphy's law, is it?
entrepreneurial cross you have to bear. Things are going to go sideways at the worst possible time. And, obviously I wanted to make a great impression on Luke too. So, but fortunately there were enough positive things that, it wasn't totally a wash.
Great, great. Yeah. That's a great mindset to have, isn't it? Just assume everything's going to go wrong and just do your best, right? I
Yeah.
heard that
Yeah.
from a influencer recently, and they said it and I thought, they were talking about the idea that people get so stressed out about making sure that the presentation, this really important presentation they've got, just goes perfectly. But if you assume that you're not going to sleep the night before, the projectors or the whatever, the USB is not going to work correctly, the software, everything is going
Right.
to go wrong, and you prepare for that, and some of it you can't necessarily prepare for in terms of having a backup, but just having that ready in your mind. Then anything that goes well that day is going to be a bonus.
Perfection is a journey, not a destination.
Right. Yeah. Great. Great
Yeah.
summary line. So tell us more about the vision and plan for what you're doing. So I was looking at all the entry. You sent me a list of like all the dates and the progress of your work. And obviously you've had a very colorful career, really impressive looking career in sort of surgery as well. Um, and I know that it looks like this year, or sorry, last year you were uh is it you wrote entry into regional competitive lifting gyms? Was that yourself? You talking about
That's where we
yourself
are
there?
now. Yeah. For these powerlifting gyms I talked about.
Where you're
Um,
using this
yeah.
technology?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Right.
they're using it there. Um, there are influencers, that's,
Sure.
the hardest thing for me is the business part of this. And I have tremendous respect for sales and marketing now, but sales and marketing are YouTube influencers. So we're attracting the attention of some influencers and working on that. Um, it's hard to create a demand for something that somebody's never seen before. So
Right. It's like the
that,
Henry Ford thing, isn't it? It's if you ask them what
well,
they need, they want faster horses, one of those types of
exactly,
things. Yeah.
exactly. So we're in that phase. We have to create the demand. The
Absolutely.
business is rudimentary right now. I have a manufacturer here in St. Pete. Actually, the people that did the product development for this are now doing manufacturing, and it's incumbent upon me to uh, generate sales. Now, I'm I've been some of your listeners have been very nice, have contacted me inquiring about getting the machine. my preference right now is to still stay in beta testing in terms of like, I monitor that machine out there and where the rough points are and smooth them out,
Hmm.
and trying to stay in the Southeast where I can easily access that.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So then moving on to the focus this year, you mentioned something very exciting: advanced programs and artificial intelligence. Can you elaborate on what that means for the future of what you're doing?
Okay, well, now let's I'm gonna go off now. Okay.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. It is just unbelievable to me that with the possible introduction of Nautilus in 1970, weight training has not changed since its inception. It's still, like I said before, it's reps and sets. Um, there are so many other capabilities that are left on the table with strength training that we're not accessing because we are basically moving a chunk of iron up and down, and that's the technology. So um, so what we discovered with this cable attachment to a very smart motor is that we have the ability to really develop complex programs that uh, greatly improve the lifting experience. I'm fond of saying that when they say failure in these articles, when you're doing 100-pound curls 6 times and you fail on the sixth rep, you have not reached failure. You have a chunk of iron in your hand that weighs 100 pounds. If that chunk of iron changed to 80 pounds, you could do more repetition. You've just failed at a relative number of 100 pounds.
Right.
So one capability we have is to be able to take you beyond failure. We are tracking the velocity that the weight moves up and down. We are tracking whether it's going, the direction it moves up and down, what position it's in. So, and we can easily modify the assistance during the workout to accommodate the lifter. So again, one of the things is when the velocity reduces dramatically and you come close to failure, we can add in additional assistance. You can do additional reps. We can take you down further, and that's basically the ultimate drop set. Um, the um, uh, the other thing is just to modify the velocity during the workout itself. So if you're doing 10 repetitions and you just kind of as you reach a certain point where it's moving more slowly, you add more assistance. So you maintain the same pace throughout. Now, more importantly, everything's artificial intelligence now, but I took out a provisional patent on this, 6 years ago. So it was something that we're thinking. And there was a tremendous amount of data during each workout. During every workout, it's the reps and the weight, it's the velocity during the weight, so we'll be able to look at individual lifters and let them know when it's time to increase. Let them know if there might be an overtraining thing where they're not making the same progress that they should. And these are relatively simple algorithms that you can put in there based on the velocity and when it occurs. Now there's a larger potential of this. Obviously, the sort of the Peloton thing, where if we have several of these units, or not say several, let's say dozens of these units around the country,
Start
and
pulling that data.
you start pulling the data, and then you can take how many 30 to 35-year-old females, what's your scoreboard? Where do you stand with them? How's your progress going? So the data that's in there is drastically underused now. And there's a lot more that we can do with it.
Okay. Interesting. And AI can play a big part in helping to do that. Is that what
Yeah,
you're?
AI is just algorithms, that's, and all it is that, you just say, oh, and and again, velocity, everybody knows velocity is a huge indicator of fatigue. So we can just say when the velocity hits this point, do this, and with appropriate algorithms, we can um, make enlightened decisions on workouts.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. It's one of the things you got me thinking about earlier is I've heard this statement a lot. This statement, which is like, the weightlifting world hasn't moved on. They're still using barbells and gravity based, you know. And I think, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of technologies, motorized resistance, some of these other kind of fancy resistance training technologies we're seeing, not including yours necessarily, aren't catching on, just in spite of a lot of what looks like pretty good marketing. Um, there's just this is really, I guess, one take on why some people aren't gravitating towards, for instance, motorized resistance machines. Is the idea that some people just like to see the weight go up and down, which is
Right.
not an issue in your case because you still see the weight go up and down. But
You've hit our niche. Our niche is that we don't take you out of the gym to do it. We go into the gym with you, and
right,
that's why a lot of systems have failed.
right,
Even though they're very foreign, buzzy things, and to your point, we're relatively invisible. If you walked in
yeah.
and you wouldn't know our machine was there.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. And you could even
Yeah.
refine the technology even more where it truly is. You can't even perceive the difference between one, machine or freeway device that has yours and doesn't. Um, so that's interesting. Yeah, that does it. It makes it a lot more kind of subtle. But that's the problem, isn't it? It's weird because I do feel like a lot of, I mean, I hear about new technologies to enhance resistance training quite often. I get emails, people say, oh, you should interview so and so about this. And most of the time it just doesn't catch on. And the technologies that people sort of stick to are the basic free weights and things.
Right.
And obviously you've got a lot of marketing and a lot of promotion happening there as well. So there's constant kind of battle going on. Yeah, I'm just thinking. You mentioned Peloton. Obviously, there's other technologies like Tonal and Mirror
Right.
that are like high end devices for like exercise in your own home. I believe. I don't know them that well. I haven't looked into them lately. I don't know how they're doing. I would say I haven't heard many podcasts advertise them lately. So maybe that's
Right.
a sign that maybe they're not doing so well. I have no idea. Take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, it's fascinating how a lot of these technologies really struggle to get traction.
Yeah, we try your interface has to be familiar, you
Right.
know, and so our interface are the weights that you normally use. So yeah, you know, a lot of these motor based things, some one new one I just heard of, but they're basically uh, uh, pulling against an electric motor, which is basically magnetic resistance. If you've ever tried to push two magnets together, it's kind of spongy and elastic like a spring, and it's a foreign resistance feeling. So we're all about the weights. We want to make weights better. We're not trying to replace weights.
Interesting. That could be your slogan or one of
I
them.
know. I just said that. Write that one down.
That's a good one.
I
Right.
think it's
Yeah,
been
yeah,
done,
yeah, yeah.
but
Yeah. And I'm excited. I mean, I'd love to try it out. I'd love to just experiment with it. Probably going to be some time until I can get over to where you are and actually do it there. So maybe one day you could ship one over here and we could see if we could use it here.
I,
Um, but
yeah,
so
so
will you be looking, I think you mentioned before, you'd be looking to implement this with selectorized machines like Imagine Strength or MedX or Nautilus? Well,
that was, obviously my work with MedX. That was my
yes.
original plan. I didn't, I didn't want to become a businessman and sell things. There was a guy called Charlie Barth, who you might know, was in charge of MedX, and I bothered him to death to the point he wouldn't answer my calls anymore. But I had the vision that this was the next MedX, which I still do, but they kind of disappeared. So that's when we kind of pivoted to free weights, and then I was happy to see Imagine Strength come up, but but those guys, as a relatively new startup, they're fighting their own battles now, so I'm not going to bother them, at this point. And quite frankly, when we looked at it, the free weight market is huge. I mean, there are 10, 20 free weight gyms everywhere.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, you alluded to this earlier about your goals in relation to the medical community. So, what? I mean, you don't strike me as someone who wants to do this to make a lot of money or sell this to a whole bunch of people. I mean, I could be wrong, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But what's really important to you? Where do you want to see this really take hold? Maybe you do want to see it everywhere.
The two big things, I do think that it'll make a huge impact on sports. I'd like to see that happen. Right. But I think that we can vastly reduce frailty, osteoporosis, sarcopenia in the elderly by having them do this one set with enhanced eccentrics once a week with, a very limited number of movements. So they're not, overwhelmed by the experience. And living in St. Petersburg, which is notorious for old people, I see the value of that. That's a huge value that I hope happens.
I see. I would think physios would be a potentially good market for this as well, right? Or not?
Oh, you're hitting a live wire there, Lawrence.
Okay.
Anytime our horrible United States medical system,
yes,
does not recognize prevention, so they'll get paid to treat somebody for whatever it is, 4-6 weeks, and then they're on their way. And this is a lifetime experience. Once you start this, you need to keep doing it. So it needs to be inexpensive and easy, safe, reliable in order for it to succeed in this country.
Okay. Mike, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Time flew by. It was wonderful.
As always. No, thank you. And likewise. And I really appreciate the conversation. Really interested in the technology. Would love to have a go, as I said. Hopefully we'll do one day.
I will make that happen.
That would be great. Come over to Galway. We'll treat you like a king, and maybe we could hook. We've got medics in a facility here at the moment at Optimus Strength studio here.
Put it on top, clamp it on. We attach into the pins and the minor weight stack above. It's plug and play. So
my partner Sean Dunleavy would love to play with this. So maybe one day we can make that happen. It'd be great to meet you in person too.
Okay.
So
that's a new entry in my bucket list.
Sounds good. And so for everyone tuning in, best way to connect with you, one of those is to go to the website, which I mentioned many times, maxneg.com. That's maxneg.com, where they can see the demo, which I really recommend, so they can see what this looks like in action.
Right.
But also connect with you. Is there any other places we should send people, Mike, to connect with you at all? Or is that the best place?
My personal email works. It's just a very cumbersome. I don't know why I got this email address. I'll say it slowly, but it's God, I hate this. Mike not Mac MAC .Millan MILLAN .2020 @gmail.com.
Okay, you know what you need to do after this, Mike? Go and set up a G Suite account and get Mike at maxneg.com.
Aha. That's again, the technological aspects of communication evaded me for years.
Well, you've been focused on other much more productive things, to be fair to you. But you're just fine with a more professional email address like that. You'll get much better responses and easier to remember and all the rest of it. So and for everyone listening, tuning in, to get the show notes for this episode, please go to highintensitybusiness.com. Just search episode 453. If this is anywhere near as popular as the last one, it'll probably be in the sidebar anyway. And again, please go and listen to part 1 if you've decided that you're just going to listen to part 2 first, which I think is fine because I think this is as a standalone episode. It's been really interesting anyway. But go listen to part 1. That's episode 444 as well. It'll be linked to from this blog post on episode 453 on highintensitybusiness.com. And until next time, thank you very much for listening. This episode is brought to you by Imagine Strength, your go-to for safe, simple, and effective high-intensity training equipment. Growing a successful high-intensity training business requires workout equipment that's not only high quality, but also intelligently designed to fit the unique needs of your studio. And that's where Imagine Strength comes in. Drawing on the wisdom of the legendary Arthur Jones, Imagine Strength has crafted a groundbreaking line of fitness equipment that's as affordable as it is efficient, giving your studio the upgrade it needs without breaking the bank. The team at Imagine Strength breathes HIIT. Their passion for high-intensity training shines through in their designs, which they've consistently refined and innovated for optimum effectiveness and user experience. From my personal experience at Rec, I can attest to the careful consideration and craftsmanship that goes into every single piece. My Imagine Strength workout was absolutely brutal, in a good way, of course. Now, what makes Imagine Strength truly stand out? They have innovative equipment tailored for the unique needs of HIIT studios, affordable and efficient designs, lowering the barriers to entry for a HIIT business, continuous innovation and refinement ensuring your studio stays ahead of the curve. Founder Jeff Turner and his team are dedicated to moving the HIIT industry forward and making strength training accessible to more people than ever before. Here's how you get started. Number 1, visit imaginestrength.com. Number 2, discuss your specific needs with the team. And number 3, select the equipment that will propel your business to the next level. Head to imaginestrength.com today and give your HIIT business the Imagine Strength edge. Be part of the HIIT revolution and see firsthand how their unique equipment can transform your studio's workout experience. Elevate your HIIT business with Imagine Strength. Let's go.